Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I used to believe marriage was built on trust, that no matter what, Emily and I were on the same side. We had been together for over a decade, through job losses, family deaths, financial struggles, the kind of things that either break a couple apart or make them stronger. I thought we had become stronger, but I was wrong. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Somewhere along the way, Emily changed. At first, it was small things. The way she started spending more time at church, always with an excuse. "The choir needs me," she'd say, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. "The worship team is struggling without my leadership." She spoke about the church like it was another home, like it was a place she belonged more than here with me. I didn't question it. Faith was important to her. If staying late at rehearsals gave her purpose, then who was I to complain? I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to believe she was doing something good. But then, other things started happening. She stopped really seeing me. She would come home late, slipping into bed without a word. The woman who once greeted me with warmth now barely gave me a passing glance. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, was now glued to her hand. She smiled at her screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. And when I'd ask what was so funny, she'd just shake her head. "Church stuff," she'd say. That answer used to be enough. Until it wasn't. The real turning point came at her mother's birthday dinner. We had been in a nice restaurant, the entire family gathered around a long table, passing plates and sharing stories. It should have been a good night. But then, someone made a joke about marriage, about how couples who pray together stay together. Emily laughed, too loudly, like she was in on a joke that the rest of us didn't understand. "Oh, trust me," she said, shaking her head. "Some husbands need way more than prayer to keep things together." The table chuckled. I forced a smile. Then her sister, always the instigator, leaned in. "What's that supposed to mean?" Emily smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Let's just say some of us have higher standards than others." There was a knowing look in her eye, the kind that made my stomach twist. Her mother cleared her throat, trying to shift the conversation, but the damage was done. The words sat there, poisoning the air. I wanted to believe she was just joking, that she didn't mean anything by it, but I wasn't sure anymore. That night, as we drove home in silence, I replayed the moment in my head. The way she looked at me, the way everyone at that table had laughed at my expense. Finally, I broke the silence. "What was that back there?" Emily barely glanced at me. "What was what?" "You know what. The comment. The whole higher standards thing." She sighed, rubbing her temple. "It was just a joke, Mark. Don't be so sensitive." I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. It didn't feel like a joke. She scoffed. "Then maybe you should ask yourself why it bothered you so much." I clenched my jaw. This wasn't the woman I married. Or maybe it was, and I had just been too blind to see it. As we pulled into the driveway, I knew one thing for certain. Something was wrong. And if she wasn't going to tell me what it was, I was going to find out myself. The tension between us didn't go away after that dinner. If anything, it got worse. Emily started treating me like I was a burden, like I was some obligation she had to deal with instead of the man she had promised to spend her life with. She wasn't outright cruel. She was too smart for that. But the little things started piling up. She never looked me in the eye anymore. Never asked how my day was. Conversations became mechanical, empty. "Did you pay the water bill?" "Yeah." "Okay." And that was it. No warmth. No connection. Just a routine exchange between two people who were supposed to be partners. She spent more nights away. More late rehearsals. More special meetings with the pastor. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But I wasn't stupid. Something didn't add up. One night, after she had left for another urgent church meeting, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched dinner. My mind was a mess, full of doubts and half-formed theories. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then again, maybe I wasn't. I glanced at her side of the table, where she used to sit across from me every night. The seat was empty, just like it had been for weeks. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our old messages. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but something inside me told me to check. That's when I saw it. A pattern. Her messages used to be full of love yous and see you soon and little check-ins throughout the day. But lately, Tuesday, 10:30 p.m., running late. Don't wait up. Thursday, 11:15 p.m., rehearsal went long. Going straight to bed. Saturday, 9:45 p.m., church stuff. Be home later. Church stuff. Always church stuff. My stomach twisted. I tapped on her location-sharing app, the one we had both agreed to use years ago when she insisted it would make us feel more connected. I hadn't checked it in ages, but now, as the map loaded, I felt a cold chill run through me. She wasn't at the church. She was across town. A hotel. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My hands tightened around my phone. I could have called her. Could have demanded an explanation right then and there. But what would be the point? She would lie. Twist the story. Make me feel like the crazy one. No, I needed proof. I stood abruptly, grabbing my keys. If she thought I was just going to sit at home, waiting like a fool, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I drove in silence, my grip iron-tight on the steering wheel. The whole time, my mind ran through every possible excuse she could give me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was meeting someone for church business. Maybe I pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. Her car was there, parked neatly in a corner spot. There was no maybe anymore. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to barge in, wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I scanned the lobby, looking for something, anything that could help. Then I spotted it. A small cafe across the street, the perfect place to sit and wait. I parked myself at a corner table, facing the hotel entrance. Ordered a coffee I had no intention of drinking. And then I waited. Minutes crawled by. Then an hour. Then another. And then, finally, she walked out. Emily, my wife. She wasn't alone. The pastor was with her. I felt my stomach drop. They were laughing, talking in hushed voices. His hand brushed against her lower back as they stepped toward his car, and she didn't pull away. That was all I needed to see. I exhaled slowly, gripping the table so hard my knuckles went white. She had lied to me, repeatedly, looked me in the eye, told me she was at church, and then walked into a hotel with him. But I didn't move. Not yet. I wasn't going to waste my anger on a screaming match in a parking lot. No, Emily didn't deserve that. She deserved something much worse. So I sat there, watching, memorizing every little interaction. I let the betrayal settle, let the fire burn deep inside me, until I knew exactly what I was going to do. She thought she was untouchable, thought she could betray me and walk away without consequences. She had no idea that I was about to burn her whole world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Emily's soft, steady breathing beside me. She had slipped into bed like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent hours wrapped around another man. I could still smell the faint trace of expensive cologne on her skin, one that didn't belong to me. I turned my head slightly, watching her in the darkness. I had spent years loving this woman, trusting her, believing that we had something real. And now, the person lying beside me felt like a stranger. I wanted to shake her awake, wanted to drag her out of bed and demand answers. But what would be the point? I had seen all I needed to see. There was no misunderstanding, no possible way to twist what I had witnessed. Emily was cheating, and she had been doing it for a while. The next morning, I forced myself to act normal. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't show it. She hummed softly as she got dressed, checking her reflection in the mirror like she wasn't carrying the weight of betrayal on her shoulders. "Big day at church," she said casually, slipping on her earrings. "The pastor wants to go over a new sermon series with me after rehearsal. I might be late again." I took a sip of my coffee, nodding like I believed her, like I hadn't seen her sneaking out of a hotel with him just hours ago. "No problem," I said smoothly. "I'll keep dinner warm." She smiled. "You're the best." I watched her walk out the door, my fingers tightening around my coffee cup until I thought it might crack. She thought she had fooled me. She thought she could keep lying, keep sneaking around behind my back without consequences. But I was done being played for a fool. I needed proof. More than just what I saw last night. If I wanted to make sure Emily couldn't talk her way out of this, I had to gather something undeniable. Something that would expose her for exactly who she was. So I got to work. The first thing I did was check our shared bank account. Emily had never been the type to hide her spending, and sure enough, there it was, a series of charges at luxury hotels and fancy restaurants that I knew we had never been to together. Each one corresponded perfectly with a night she claimed to be at church. I took screenshots, saving every transaction. Next, I set up a small recording device in her car, hidden neatly under the dashboard. Emily loved to talk on the phone while driving, and I had a feeling that if I gave it a few days, she'd slip up and say something incriminating. But the biggest piece of my plan? The security cameras at church. Emily didn't know that I had become friends with the church's security manager years ago. The guy had always liked me, always went out of his way to chat after services. If anyone had access to footage of Emily and the pastor sneaking around, it was him. I made my way to the church that afternoon, walking in like I belonged there. I found him sitting behind his desk, watching a feed of the main sanctuary. "Mark," he greeted, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you today." I leaned against the doorway, forcing a casual smile. "Figured I'd drop by. Needed to ask you something." He tilted his head. "What's up?" I exhaled slowly. "You keep records of the security footage, right?" He nodded. "Yeah. All cameras feed into a system, and we store footage for a couple months before it gets wiped." I hesitated, then dropped the act. "I need to see something." His face darkened. He wasn't stupid. "This about Emily?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That obvious?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, man, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but people talk. You're a good guy. You deserve to know." He turned to the computer, typing a few things before pulling up a list of recorded feeds. "What are you looking for?" I gave him the date of her last late rehearsal. He clicked through the footage, scanning through timestamps until finally, there she was. Emily and the pastor. They were in the back of the sanctuary, near the altar, their voices hushed, their bodies too close. She was laughing at something he said, tilting her head in that way she used to when we first started dating. He touched her arm, then let his hand slide lower. A sick feeling curled in my stomach, but I didn't look away. "Mark," the security manager said quietly, "do you want me to stop?" I shook my head. No, I needed to see it. I needed to let it burn into my brain. Because when the time came, I wanted to remember exactly what they had done to me. Minutes later, I had the footage saved to a flash drive. I shook the man's hand, thanked him, and walked out of that church knowing one thing for certain. Emily and the pastor thought they had been sneaky, thought they were safe. But now I had them both in the palm of my hand, and I was going to make sure that when I exposed them, there would be no coming back from it. I drove home, gripping the flash drive like it was a loaded weapon. In a way, it was. Everything I needed to burn Emily's perfect little world to the ground was stored on this tiny piece of plastic. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house, my mind racing through the possibilities. I could confront her tonight, shove the evidence in her face, demand an explanation. But what would that really accomplish? She would cry, deny, spin the story in a way that somehow made me look like the bad guy. No, Emily didn't deserve a private conversation. She deserved something bigger. I had spent years being the quiet, patient husband. The one who didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't question the long nights and the dismissive remarks. She had counted on me staying that way. But I wasn't that man anymore. I stepped inside, slipping the flash drive into my pocket as I walked past the framed wedding photo on the wall. It used to be my favorite picture of us. Emily looking radiant in her dress, me standing beside her, convinced I'd found the love of my life. Now it made me sick. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner, like she wasn't the biggest hypocrite to ever step foot in a church. "Hey, babe," she said, flashing me a smile. "Good day." I forced a small nod. "Yeah, got a lot done." She turned back to the cutting board, completely unaware that she had less than a week left before her entire life fell apart. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered more evidence, screenshots of the bank transactions, text messages she had deleted but were still recoverable on our shared phone account. I even found a few notes she had scribbled in a journal, casual reminders about meeting at the church after closing and dinner at the usual place. Every piece of the puzzle fit perfectly. Now, all I needed was the right moment to reveal it. And what better moment than Sunday morning service? The church was always packed on Sundays, filled with families, community leaders, and people who trusted the pastor to be a man of integrity. They hung on his every word, looked up to him as a guiding force in their lives. I was going to make sure they saw him for who he really was. The night before, I told Emily I had to leave town for a work conference. She didn't even pretend to be disappointed. Just gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and said, "See you when you get back." I had never hated her more. Instead of driving to the airport, I parked a few blocks away from the church, waiting. I knew her routine. She always arrived early to help set up, always made sure everything was perfect before the congregation filled the pews. I snuck in through a side door, moving carefully through the halls. The security guy had already given me access to the system, so I slipped into the media room unnoticed. The massive projector screens that hung behind the altar were controlled from here, used for displaying Bible verses and worship lyrics. Perfect. I inserted the flash drive and set the footage to play on a 30-second delay. Then, I stepped into the sanctuary, blending into the crowd just as service began. The choir sang. People clapped. Emily stood near the front, leading them, completely unaware that her career as the holier-than-thou choir director was seconds away from ending. Then, the pastor took the stage. He smiled warmly at the congregation, holding his Bible in one hand. Brothers and sisters, today's sermon is about faithfulness and integrity. The irony nearly made me laugh. He continued speaking, pacing the stage, his voice smooth and confident. In a world full of temptation, we must stand strong in our commitments, in our faith, in our marriages. The moment he said it, the screens behind him flickered. The live feed of the sermon cut out, replaced by them. The footage played in complete silence. Emily and the pastor in the back of the church, his hands on her waist, her lips on his. The secret touches, the whispered words, the undeniable proof of what they had been doing for months. Gasps filled the sanctuary. A woman shrieked. Someone dropped a Bible, the thud echoing through the now-dead silent room. Emily turned slowly, her face draining of color as she stared at the screen. The pastor froze mid-sentence, his mouth slightly open, his entire body stiff. Then chaos. People stood up, murmuring in shock, turning to each other with wide eyes. Some immediately walked out. Others started shouting. A deacon marched toward the stage, looking ready to drag the pastor off himself. Emily's knees buckled, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have the words to manipulate her way out. She fainted, right there, in front of hundreds of people. The pastor, panicked, tried to regain control, holding up his hands. Now, let's not jump to conclusions, but no one was listening anymore. I stood in the back, watching as everything crumbled around them. Watching as the church, the community, the world they had built on deception came crashing down in a matter of seconds. A slow clap started somewhere in the congregation. Then another, and another. Half the room erupted in applause. I smiled, turned around, and walked out. Emily had spent years making me feel like I was nothing. Like I didn't deserve the truth, didn't deserve respect. I walked out of that church with my head high, the sound of the congregation's chaos fading behind me. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for months, maybe years, was finally gone. Emily had spent so long making me feel small, making me feel like I was the problem, but now the truth was out for everyone to see. And the best part? I didn't have to say a single word. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I had expected to feel some kind of overwhelming emotion, rage, sadness, regret. But all I felt was calm. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Emily. I let it ring. I already knew what she was going to say. She'd try to twist it, try to make herself the victim. Maybe she'd beg, maybe she'd scream. Either way, I wasn't interested. Another call, this time from an unknown number. Probably the pastor, desperate to salvage what was left of his reputation. I turned off my phone and started the car. Let them panic. Let them scramble for excuses. That was their problem now. I drove home, enjoying the quiet, the way the world felt different. Lighter. I had spent so long living under Emily's thumb, letting her dictate how I felt, how I saw myself. But now I was in control. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily's car wasn't there. She must have still been at the church, dealing with the fallout. Good. Gave me time to think. I walked inside and immediately went to the bedroom. The closet was full of her things, the scent of her perfume still clinging to the air. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the clothes, the shoes, the carefully arranged accessories. All the little things that made up the life we had built together. I grabbed a suitcase from the top shelf and yanked it down. Then I started packing. I didn't bother folding anything. I just grabbed handfuls of her clothes, her shoes, her expensive bags, the ones she insisted she needed for church events, and stuffed them into the suitcase. Every item I tossed and made me feel better. Like I was taking back a piece of myself with every shirt, every dress, every memory I erased. Halfway through, the front door slammed open. Mark, I didn't stop packing. She stormed into the bedroom, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. Are you kidding me? I zipped up the suitcase. No. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh, shaking her head. You ruined everything. I turned to face her, leaning casually against the dresser. Did I? Or did you ruin everything when you decided to sneak around with him? Her jaw clenched. You had no right to do that in front of everyone. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the same way you had no right to lie to me? To cheat on me? To humiliate me for months while you played the perfect little choir director? She folded her arms, her body practically vibrating with anger. You could have talked to me. I laughed. Actually laughed. Talked to you? Emily, when? When you were sneaking out late at night. When you were lying straight to my face. When you were in some back room at the church with him? Her expression faltered for a second, but then she lifted her chin, tried to regain control. It wasn't don't. My voice was sharp, cutting through whatever excuse she was about to throw at me. I have everything recorded. The texts, the money you spent on hotels, the footage from the church, everything. So don't stand here and insult me by pretending it wasn't what it clearly was. Her breathing was uneven now, her confidence slipping. Mark, please just let me explain. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. There's nothing to explain, Emily. It's done. She looked at the suitcase, her mouth pressing into a thin line. So what? You're kicking me out. I met her gaze, my voice calm. No, I'm telling you to leave. There's a difference. She scoffed, crossing her arms. I have nowhere to go. I shrugged. Not my problem. Her eyes widened, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing my ground. She had expected a fight, had expected me to yell, maybe even break down. But I wasn't giving her anything. Mark, she said, her voice softer now, almost desperate. We can fix this. I tilted my head. No, you can fix this. Me? I'm already done. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. So that's it. That's it. I picked up the suitcase, walked past her, and set it by the front door. She followed me, her breathing shaky. Where am I supposed to go? I turned, looking her in the eye. Maybe you should ask him. Her face crumbled. I opened the door. Goodbye, Emily. For a moment, she didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she finally let out a sharp breath, grabbed the suitcase, and stepped outside. I closed the door behind her. Then I locked it. And just like that, Emily was gone. The house was quiet, peaceful. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. I had spent so much time feeling trapped, feeling powerless. But now, the silence in the house was different now. It wasn't heavy, wasn't suffocating like it had been for months. It was peaceful, like the walls themselves were relieved that Emily was gone. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the space where she had stood just minutes ago, her suitcase in hand, disbelief written all over her face as she walked out for the last time. I thought I'd feel something more. Maybe sadness, maybe regret. But all I felt was relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't waiting for the next dismissive remark, the next lie, the next excuse. I was free. I exhaled slowly and ran a hand over my face. There was still more to do. This wasn't just about kicking Emily out. I needed to make sure she had no way to drag me back in her mess. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the lawyer I had quietly reached out to a few days ago when I knew where this was heading. He picked up on the second ring. "Mark, I was expecting your call." "Yeah," I said, pacing the room. "It's time. Let's move forward with the paperwork." There was no hesitation. "Understood. I'll have everything filed first thing in the morning." "Thanks." I hesitated, then added, "Make sure she gets nothing." "No alimony. No assets. Nothing." He allowed a short chuckle. "With the evidence you have, she won't even try to fight for anything." That was the plan. Emily was shameless, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't want the details of her affair being aired out in court. She'd sign the papers and disappear, which was exactly what I wanted. I ended the call and set my phone down, staring at the empty house. It still felt strange, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But there was no more waiting, no more hoping things would get better. It was over. The first few days without Emily felt surreal. I half expected her to come storming back in, to demand that I let her explain, to try and manipulate her way back into my life. But she didn't. Instead, I got a few texts. "Emily, I can't believe you did this to me. Emily, you humiliated me in front of everyone. Was that really necessary? Emily, you're going to regret this." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Then the text changed. "Emily, Mark, please, can we at least talk? Emily, I don't have anywhere to go. Emily, I made a mistake. I miss you." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. She didn't miss me. She missed the comfort, the security, the stability. She missed the husband who had once blindly trusted her. But that man was gone. I blocked her number. The real test came on Sunday. I hadn't planned on going to church, but curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to see what kind of wreckage I had left behind. So I pulled up to the parking lot, taking in the sight of the half-empty rows. Normally, the place would be packed, people flooding through the doors to shake hands, to chat, to take their usual seats. But today, there were gaps in the crowd. I stepped inside, and the shift was obvious. There was no cheerful buzz of conversation, no warm greetings. The energy in the room was off. People whispered in hushed voices, casting glances toward the front where the pastor usually stood. Except he wasn't there. A different man took the stage, one of the elders. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked out over the congregation. As most of you know, Pastor Daniels has decided to step down due to personal reasons. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I smirked. Decided to step down? No, he had no choice. His career, his reputation, his entire life had crumbled in front of the very people who had once worshipped the ground he walked on. The elder continued, choosing his words carefully. "While this is a difficult time, we want to remind everyone that the church is more than one man. We will move forward together." I tuned the rest out, scanning the room. And then I saw her, Emily, sitting alone near the back. Her usual group of church friends, the ones who used to hang on her every word, were nowhere near her. She kept her head down, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. She looked small. For the first time since this all started, I saw fear in her eyes. I could have walked over to her, could have leaned down and whispered, "How does it feel?" But I didn't need to. She was already living in the wreckage of her own choices. I walked out of that church without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw Emily in person. A week later, she signed the divorce papers without a fight. She didn't try to contest anything, didn't ask for anything. Maybe she finally realized she had no leverage. The settlement was final. She was gone, and I was free. I stood outside my house that evening, breathing in the cool air, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Emily had thought she could destroy me. She thought she could lie, cheat, and manipulate her way through life without consequences. But in the end, she lost everything. And I had never been better. The first morning after the divorce was finalized, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. No weight on my chest, no dread twisting in my stomach. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Emily was officially out of my life. The house was quiet, but not the kind of silence that felt suffocating. It was peaceful, a silence that meant freedom, not loneliness. I made myself coffee and stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the empty driveway. No more waiting for her to come home late. No more excuses, no more pretending. It was over. Then the doorbell rang. I frowned, setting my mug down. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and pulled it open, only to find Emily standing there, looking like hell. Her hair was a mess, her clothes wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't wearing the polished, put-together face she always presented to the world. For the first time, she looked real. "Mark," she said, her voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "About what?" She swallowed, glancing past me into the house like she thought I might invite her in. I don't know where to go," she admitted, her voice small. "I thought I could figure it out, but everything's a mess. The church, people won't even look at me. My friends," she let out a bitter laugh. "Guess they weren't really my friends after all." I said nothing, just watched her. She shifted on her feet, rubbing her arms like she was cold. "I made a mistake, Mark. I know that now. I lost everything, and I don't." She broke off, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to do." I tilted my head. "And you think that's my problem?" Her eyes snapped up to mine, desperation flickering behind them. I just need some time to get back on my feet, just until I figure things out." I let out a short laugh. "You want me to help you? After everything?" She flinched. "I know I don't deserve it, but Mark, I held up a hand, cutting her off. You don't deserve anything from me." She sucked in a shaky breath, looking like she was about to cry. But I didn't care. Not anymore. "You had everything, Emily," I continued. "A home, a husband who loved you, a life people would kill for, and you threw it all away for him. You chose this, and now you're dealing with the consequences." She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "You didn't feel guilty when you were sneaking around," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "You didn't feel guilty when you were lying to my face. You didn't feel guilty when you were humiliating me in front of everyone. You only care now because you lost." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Mark," I shook my head. "No, you don't get to say my name like that. Not anymore." She sniffed, looking away. I exhaled slowly, feeling the last traces of bitterness leave my system. "I'm not angry, Emily. Not anymore. But I am done. So whatever you need, you're going to have to find it somewhere else." She let out a slow, shaky breath, nodding like she already knew that was coming. Like this was her last, desperate attempt to fix the unfixable. She wiped her face quickly, composing herself. Then she looked at me one last time. "Goodbye, Mark," she whispered. "Goodbye, Emily." She turned and walked away, down the porch steps, down the driveway. This time, I didn't watch her go. I closed the door and locked it. And just like that, she was truly gone. Days passed, then weeks. Life moved on, and so did I. I found a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around Emily's moods, her lies, her fake perfection. I started going out more, reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with. I focused on work, on myself, on all the things I had put on hold for her. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at a coffee shop, someone I hadn't seen in years. "Mark," she said, surprised. "Wow, you look good." I smiled. "Yeah, I feel good." We sat and talked for a while, catching up, laughing about things that had nothing to do with my past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like me again. Emily was just a chapter in my life, one that had finally ended, and I was more than ready for the next one. The months after Emily left were some of the strangest in my life. Not because I missed her, I didn't. Not because I regretted what I had done. If anything, I wished I had done it sooner. But because for the first time in years, I had to figure out who I was without her. For so long, my life had revolved around her schedule, her needs, her version of what our marriage was supposed to be. Now, I woke up every morning with no one to answer to but myself. At first, that realization was unsettling. But as time passed, I started embracing it. I changed things. I repainted the bedroom, throwing out every trace of the expensive decor Emily had insisted on but never actually liked. I started cooking again, not just meals to keep me going, but food I actually enjoyed. I picked up old hobbies that I had forgotten about, little pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of that marriage. And maybe most importantly, I started seeing people again. Not dating, at least not at first. Just reconnecting with friends I had drifted away from when my world revolved around Emily's church schedule. One of those friends was Daniel. We had been close years ago, back when life was simpler, before Emily had slowly chipped away at every friendship I had. When I reached out, he didn't hesitate. "Man," he said when we met up for drinks, "I was waiting for the day you'd finally get out of that mess." I smirked, taking a sip of my beer. "You and me both." We talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed. It felt good, like stepping into an old, comfortable pair of shoes. Like I had found a piece of myself that had been missing for too long. Then he asked, "So, you seeing anyone yet?" I laughed. "Not even close." "Come on," he nudged my arm. "You can't tell me you haven't had someone catch your eye." I shook my head, but the truth was there was someone. Her name was Claire. She had been a friend of a friend, someone I had met at a gathering a few weeks back. There was no instant, overwhelming spark, no grand moment where the world slowed down. Just something easy, natural. She was funny, sharp, with a way of looking at me that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. I hadn't pursued it. Not yet. I wasn't sure if I was ready. But the more time I spent around her, the more I started thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond the wreckage of my past. A few days after my conversation with Daniel, I found myself at the same coffee shop where I had first run into Claire. She was there again, sitting by the window, flipping through a book. I hesitated. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I walked over. "Hey," I said. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Mark, hey." I gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I join you?" She closed her book, her smile widening. "Not at all." And just like that, a new chapter began. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. A conversation over coffee. A few exchanged jokes. A comfortable silence that didn't feel heavy or forced. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at the past. I was looking forward. And it felt good. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.